Welcome to sixth webinar on Java EE6 programming series from JPassion.com. Today's topic is Ajax, JSF 2.0 Ajax. Okay, so let's start with the presentation. So I'm going to finish up the presentation maybe in 10 minutes, and then rest of the presentation we are going to actually work with the hands-on lab, actually doing stuff and looking at the code. So these are the topics that we are going to cover. For those of you who are not familiar with the Ajax, I'm going to give you just like a 1-minute introduction on what Ajax is all about. And then we are going to talk about Ajax request handling in JSF 2.0. We'll actually see the difference between JSF 1.0 and JSF 2.0, how they actually handle Ajax request. Basically, the key point in JSF 2.0's Ajax request handling is partial execution and partial rendering. So we'll talk about those concepts in detail later on in this presentation. Then we are going to see how you are going to add Ajax support in your JSF 2.0 application. Basically, there are two different options. One is using JavaScript function, or you can use a tag. Okay, so let's move on. So let's spend a minute or two for understanding what Ajax is all about for those of you who are not familiar with the Ajax. So Ajax basically provides two important features. One is it does provide async communication. So without Ajax, everything is synchronous, meaning when you send a request to the server, until the server sends back the response, you are basically blocked, meaning your browser, you cannot do anything else. Okay. By using Ajax, the communication with the server happens in asynchronous fashion, meaning you can continue to work while Ajax engine in your browser will actually communicate with the backend server and receive the data. And then the second feature is that once it receives the data, it will do partial screen update, meaning it's not going to replace it's not going to refresh the whole page. Instead, it will update only the elements that need to be updated while leaving everything else intact. So it's called a partial screen update. So basically that replaces the click and wait and refresh model of non-Ajax communication with the server. So that's basically what Ajax is all about. So this picture actually shows the difference between a non-Ajax environment, which is a synchronous model, and then Ajax model on the bottom. So in non-Ajax model, which is a synchronous model, basically when user asks for something to the server, user is blocked here until server sends back the response. So user operation is in fact interrupted in this model while data is being fetched. In Ajax model, user continue to work while there is Ajax engine is actually sending the request to the server and then receive the response. And once it receives the response, it will partially update. It will partially update the elements on UI. So it provides uninterrupted user operation. Okay, so let's move on to how Ajax request is handled in JSF 1.0 and JSF 2.0. We're going to mostly focus on JSF 2.0. Again, key aspect of JSF 2.0's Ajax handling is partial execution and partial rendering. So this is the famous JSF request processing lifecycle. It does have 6 phases, and it basically each of these blue block represent 6 phases. What it means is that in the non-partial execution and non-partial rendering model, which is a JSF 1.0, every single component in the view. By the way, when you're actually running JSF application, for each view, a tree is constructed, and the tree is actually made of all the UI components, and each of those components will actually go through these 6 phases. Okay, and that's actually quite inefficient. So that's the reason JSF 2.0 now comes with the partial execution and partial rendering model. So let's actually talk about that in a bit more detail. So JSF regular lifecycle spans the entire execute and render process of an application for all components of a page or view as a default. So as a default, it goes through all the 6 phases for all UI components on that page. And that's the default in JSF 1.0. And again, that's very inefficient. Basically, you are basically executing and rendering for every component, even though those components do not really participate in any change, anything like that. So in JSF 2.0, now it's possible to process or execute, it's the same term, the execute or process, or render only the parts of an application. So you can select a set of UI components for execution, and you can select a set of UI components for rendering. So that's what is called the partial execution and partial rendering, and that's a lot more efficient. And this is all happened behind the scenes, so you don't really have to actually understand how things work. But basically, JSF 2.0, by doing partial execution and partial rendering, is a lot more efficient than JSF 2.0's the regular lifecycle, the request handling. So, for example, in JSF 2.0, Ajax framework can generate requests containing information on particular component, which particular component or components may be processed and which particular components may be rendered back to the client. So this is again explanation of partial execution and partial rendering. So we're going to actually see how you can specify the set of components for execution and set of components for rendering. So when you're using Ajax tag, you can specify execute and render attribute, and then you can specify set of UI components for partial execution and partial rendering. So we'll see examples of that later on. Now, the way things work behind the scene on the server is that when it actually receives Ajax request from the client, it actually constructs internally what is called a partial view context. Okay, so this partial view context maintains the list of UI components that need to be processed and list of UI components that need to be rendered. So those are partial execution list of components and partial render a list of components. Okay, so in fact it will call the process partial method to process and render. And there is also actually a method called isAjaxRequest on this particular object, partial view context, and it returns true if request header. So, we are going to actually see in a few minutes when you do the hands-on lab, the way the client indicates that is in fact sending Ajax request is by having a header called the faces request. Okay, so if this faces request header is present, then the server knows that this is in fact the Ajax request from the client. And then it will construct a partial view context, which contains the list of partially executed UI components and partially to be rendered UI components. All right, so this is a picture I actually took when we did the hands-on lab. So this is the request from the client. So when the client, JSF 2.0 client, is sending Ajax request, the header faces request is set with this. Okay, so this is indication that the client is actually sending Ajax request. Okay, so as I said before, when you're using Ajax tag, the execute attribute identifies the list of components. Okay, so here we say segments of the server-side component tree. So list of components should be executed or processed. Okay. Now, render attribute specifies the list of UI components in that component tree that need to be rendered. So those are the ones that will be changed on the client, and rest of the UI components on the tree will not be changed. So it's a lot more efficient. Okay, so let's actually move on how you can actually program to add Ajax in your application. So there are two schemes for Ajax processing in JSF 2.0. As I said before, you can use JavaScript API. So in fact, the JSF implementation of Java EE6 comes with its own JavaScript library. In fact, this is the first JavaScript library that comes with as part of the Java EE6 platform. So that library provides an API, JSF.AjaxRequest. This is an API you can use. This is a JavaScript function to perform Ajax operation to the server. Or you can use this tag, fAjax tag. Okay? So we are going to look into each of these in a bit more detail in the rest of the presentation and hands-on lab. But the attributes that you specify on both of these, they are all compatible. Okay, so let's take a look at that. So let's take a look at the JavaScript function. So the way that you include your JavaScript library that comes with Java EE6, that library is called the JSF.js. Okay, so this is the JavaScript library that comes with the Java EE6 platform, meaning any Java EE6 compliant platform has this JavaScript library. And this is the way that you are going to include that JavaScript library in your application. And then you're going to use JSF.Ajax and then request, and then you're going to specify the source and event, and then you're going to actually specify some options. You're going to specify some options. Okay, so I'm going to actually explain these things in a bit more detail when we do the hands-on lab. So it's basically this is UI component, and this is the JavaScript function. So just assume that that's the JavaScript function, and we're going to actually I'm going to explain these things in a bit more detail later on. All right, so actually I'm going to move on to the presentation and do the hands-on lab and do the demo at the end of the presentation, because I want to actually explain execute and rendered tags in a bit more detail. So this is a second scheme for adding Ajax support to your application. In this case, we are using second scheme, which is using this tag. Okay, so Ajax behavior is added to an input component by adding f-Ajax core tag. So when you add this Ajax tag here, what it means is that you are adding Ajax support for this particular UI component. Okay. By the way, the one of the attribute that you can specify is event, and we're going to actually see what that means in the following slide. So if event attribute is not specified, as is the case here, the default action for the component will be performed. So if the component is input text type of component, the default event is value change. And if it is a command button like component, then default event is action. So we're going to actually take a look at these things in a bit more detail in a few minutes. All right, so these are the attributes that you can specify. The important attributes is event and execute and listener and render. So we're going to actually look into those 4 attributes. So event is basically a string that identifies a type of event which Ajax action will apply. Okay, so again, as a default, if you don't specify this event attribute, the default event will be chosen for action source components such as the command button or command link component. The event is action. And for editable value holder UI components such as input text component, the default action is value change. I mean, that's kind of obvious. And you can also specify other events such as a click, key up, mouse over, focus, and blur, and a few more. Okay, so basically these are the events that will trigger this Ajax request to the server. Okay, so this is the case. Well, so if you actually take a look at, by the way, if it's not specified, which has been the case in this example, this is input text, right? Which is added value holder type of UI component here. In that case, the default action is going to be value change action. Okay, value change event. All right, so render. So, we have seen in JavaScript function, you can specify this render as one of the options. And this is, in fact, the same information you can specify in this tag. So this render specifies a list of UI components that need to be rendered on the client. Okay, so these are the ones that will be partially rendered. You can specify the IDs of UI component, or you can specify literal. If that's the case, that's the string of component identifiers. Okay, so basically the names. If value expression is specified, it must refer to a property that returns a collection of string objects. So this could be expression language, and that could actually return a list of the string objects, and those strings actually represent UI components. if it is not specified, the default is none, meaning nothing will be rendered. There are other built-in values you can use. For example, form. That means any UI component in that particular form will be rendered. They all participate in the rendering process. None is again default. Nothing is participating. This is this particular UI component. All means everything on that page, meaning every single component in the view tree. Execute is again providing list of UI components that need to be partially executed, meaning these are the list of UI components that need to be processed on the server, and rest of the UI components in the view tree will not be processed. Okay. Again, if you can specify a literal, that has to be space delimited string of component identifiers. So what happens is that when these components specified here are executed on the server, it participates, it is processed. So it is processed in all phases except render, okay? Because render will be actually handled by the render attribute. Okay? Listener basically provides the method expression that need to be executed on the server side in response to Ajax action on the client. Okay, so it's just a method that gets executed. All right, so we are going to do hands-on lab. So that is a pretty straightforward presentation on how Ajax is supported in JSF 2.0. So let's actually do first exercise. Yeah, so the first exercise is doing Ajax with a JavaScript, and the exercise 2 is using the Ajax tag. Okay, and exercise 3 is actually the rebuilding guest number sample application using Ajax. Okay, so let's do Ajax with JavaScript. So we have actually few sample application. So let's run the simple JSF Ajax count application. So I'm gonna just run that. So I'm gonna enable the developer tool on Chrome so that we can see the traffic between client and server. So in this case, whenever I click the count, okay, Ajax operation is being performed. Okay, so here the only thing that is changing is this. So this is the only component that is partially rendered. Okay, and so if you take a look at this, request and response, you can see this is the response from the server, partial response, and this will be actually handled on the client, by client, and you can see the update ID, meaning out1, that is actually representing this UI component. That will be the one that will be rendered, okay? And the value that will be set with this UI out1 is 3. Okay, and this one in this case, again, updating out one UI component, and the value is actually 2. Okay, all right. So let's take a look at the code. Okay, so we just take a look at this, right? Yeah, so we just take a look at this and this. Okay. Now, if you take a look at the header, so let's take a look at the header as well. So if you take a look at the header, you can see request header contains this faces request field, and it contains a partial Ajax. So this is an indication to the server that this request is Ajax request from JSF 2.0 client. Okay. Now, yeah, so let's take a look at the code. So here, basically, we have output script tag that is including JSF.js library. So this is the way that you are going to use JSF.js JavaScript library that comes with Java EE6 platform. Okay, and then we have output text UI component whose ID is out1, and this is the UI component that will be rendered. Okay, and this is the value expression language, basically calling get count method of the count managed being. And then we have command button UI component, and then here it has on click the method. So when this button is clicked, it's going to invoke Ajax operation. Okay, it will send the Ajax request to the server. So this is the method from the JavaScript library, and this is the source, and this is the event, And then this is the execute and render. So this is in fact providing, in this case we have only one UI component. This is the list of UI components that need to be executed on the server. And this is the UI component. In this case, actually we have only one, but it could be list of UI components that need to be rendered. Okay, so in this case, the only thing that is going to be rendered in this particular application is just single UI component of output text. And that's basically this, number 3 and number 4. Okay. So we can actually reset it again. When we do the reset, it will perform the reset operation. So so again, you can see the way that you can specify in this case the UI components that need to be executed. You can say this.id, or you can specify the actual ID of that UI component. Okay, and then we have an action listener, and this will be actually executed when the Ajax operation is being performed on the server. Okay, so we can actually try the reset as well. So it's got reset. Okay, again, you can see the request header contains faces request, and then response also contains out1 is actually changed with value, in this case, the 0. Okay, all right. So the key attribute again is well, in this case, the way that you can specify the 3 different arguments, and the third argument here is actually, is basically the kind of hash that specifies the list of UI components for execution and list of UI components that need to be rendered. Okay, and you're going to actually see the same thing when we actually use the Ajax tag. Okay. All right, so this is the manage bean that actually provides a get count method that returns the count value, and this is a reset method that gets executed here. All right, we are going to actually change count XHTML display page. This time we are basically add another UI component, multiply button for execution, and another UI component out2 for rendering. So here we are going to add this output text. Okay, so I'm going to just this output text here. Okay, so I have to take a look at this code. Web app. Yeah, so this is the file I want to change. And the one I want to change is, okay, so I just need to add this. Okay, and then we are going to add this action listener. So we have actually added another button, and here is going to specify the multiply button himself as the execution UI component, and this is rendered UI component, so that will be rendered. So this is the one that will be changed when I click the multiply button. Okay, so let's run this application. Let me see. Oh, okay. So I have to actually add the manage bean. Yeah, so I forgot this one. So I have to change the manage bean. So that is the count.java file. So I'm going to add this property here. And then I'm going to add okay. All right. Okay, so let me just refresh. Okay, so now whenever, so let's recount, and the count is changing. Then if I actually they multiply count 2, then only this one will be changed. Okay, so in this case, this button is participating in the partial execution, and the output text UI component is participating in the partial rendering. Okay, all right. Okay, so that is, I mean, you can certainly take a look at uh, the request and response. The next one is show and hide. So in this case, let's run that application. So if I click this one, it's actually hide and show. Okay, it's taking a turn. Okay, so let's take a look at the traffic. So this is hide, and this is the show. Okay, so again, if I take a look at, oops, if I take a look at the response, again, the partial list of UI components is specified here. In this case, this is actually, yeah, so PG1, we'll take a look at that. And the data that will be the set is actually show. So that's, yeah, so this is the PG1 UI component, okay? Again, request should contain faces context. I'm sorry, the faces request header. Okay, so that's an indication that is Ajax request. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the code. So here, again, this is the way that you are going to add JavaScript library. And here we have a panel group called the PG1. Okay, and then we have output text. The value is show, and this rendered, and then it has expression language, and this is going to be either true or false. Okay, so if it is true, then this value will be shown. If it is false, then this value will not be shown. So that then we have a command button that will invoke this Ajax request by using JSF Ajax request. And again, this is the source and source of the event, and this is event. And then again, important thing is this partial list of UI components for execution and partial list of rendering for the renders. So in this case, this is the button. This button needs to be executed on the server. Rest of it will not be executed, and rendered will be this one. So only this thing, anything inside this panel group will be rendered, and we have only one, okay, UI component, okay. And then we have this manage bean that actually returns this render either true or false Boolean, okay. All right, so now let's actually modify the code. So in this case, we are going to add another image, okay, into this panel group. So what it means is that when, basically what it means is that because PG1, this panel group is partially rendered UI component, meaning any child component of this panel group will be rendered, okay? So when we click this one, it will in fact display this, okay? All right, so I'm going to change this code. So let's just add this one and show and hide. And hide and show. So in a panel group, what we want to do add is this line so that this particular child component also participating in the rendering. Okay. I have also added this GIF file already here. Okay. So if I run this application, let's see if we can just refresh it. Okay, looks like I have to rebuild. Looks like I have to also change the let's see what I have to change. Okay, so then there's nothing to be changed. Okay, so let's see what was the error. Okay, it's interesting. Okay, so let me just rebuild it. Okay, and then run it. All right, so now it works. Okay. So in this case, we have an output text UI component as well as image component. Both of them are actually participating in the rendering because those two are child components of the panel group UI component. Okay. All right, moving forward. Let me just. So we've done that. I'm going to skip this one. So let's try the echo exercise. So here, let's run this application. It's basically just echoing things. So if I say, the JPassion.com and echo, that will be just echoed here. And behind the scene is actually sending the request into to the server in Ajax fashion. So if I click Ajax, again, you can see request header contains a faces request header indicating this is Ajax request, and the response basically contains. And in this case, the rendered the ID, well, just one of in this case we have just one single rendered UI component, which is actually form the out1 form element and out1 child element. Okay. And the data is again the JPassion.com2, and that will be actually used to display, meaning re-render this particular the UI component. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the code. It's pretty much the same code. It's just the different example. So again, here we included. Okay, so this is the way that we include the JavaScript library. Okay, from the Java 6 platform, and we can add our own JavaScript library. In this case, we have echo1.javascript library. Okay, so that is, if you actually see the JavaScript library here. There you can see JavaScript library here. So echo1.js, that's actually our own JavaScript library. Okay. And in this case, so we have output text and input text here. And when command button is clicked, it will call button push the JavaScript function, which is defined in echo1.js file. Okay. And basically, it's actually saying this is an example where we are sending multiple list of the components for rendering and as well as execution. Okay, so this one button push is taking these things, these two UI components, out one and in one of this form as a target, and then we are using the target for rendering. So meaning these UI components will be participating in the rendering. Okay, and this two is actually exec. So these two UI components will be processed on the server. So that is the list of partial execution. Okay. And so here in this JavaScript library, we are basically receiving these two as an argument, and we are actually invoking the JSF Ajax request. Okay. All right. So here, we can actually add another UI component into this form. So let's just add this UI component. So in this case, we are just kind of, we are basically displaying the value in the uppercase. And then we also added another command button here. Okay. So this is the echo1 HTML file. And output. Here. And we are going to add another UI component, command button. Okay. And then we are going to add the upper string getter method of it, of upper string property. So let's change echo JavaScript code. Okay, and we are going to add the upper string, and let's add this method. So this is a getter method of that property. Okay, and let's save them all, and let's run the application. All right, so you can see this is actually the change the uppercase. Okay, so if I say input is even lowercase, JPassion, and echo. Oh, well, I have to actually invoke this one. Okay, so it's actually displaying in uppercase. Okay, again, this is the UI component that is participating in the partial execution, and this one is UI component that is participating in the partial rendering. Okay. All right, so you can see the concept of partial execution and partial rendering in JSF 2.0 is basically providing a lot more efficient way of handling Ajax request. Okay. All right. Okay, so that is the examples. That is the set of examples using JavaScript library. Now let's take a look at the sample applications that are using Ajax tag. Okay. All right, so this is pretty much the same set of code, but it's using Ajax tag. So let's try Ajax tag second echo. Let's run the application. So again, if I type anything here, JPassion echo, then it will just display it. Okay. Again, if you take a look at this, JPassion 2 echo, again, you will see the same thing. I mean, as far as the request and response is concerned, whether you're using JavaScript library or Ajax tag, the traffic should actually present the same thing. So here is a partial response, and the UI component that will be rendered with form1 out1, and here the data is JPassion 2. Okay, and again, request should indicate faces request with a partial Ajax value. Okay, all right. So let's take a look at the code. All right, so this is the way that you are going to use Ajax tag. So it's a lot simpler than calling JavaScript library. So here we have a form, and then we have Ajax tag inside this input text. Okay, so what it means is that you are basically using this input text as an execution, okay, UI component, right? And then all you have to do is basically specifying what is the list of UI components that need to be partially rendered. In this case, basically what it's saying is that this output text is a UI component that need to be rendered, okay? Now, this is an example where you are using form. So in this case, what it means is that, whenever this particular button, reset is, the reset command button is clicked, every UI component inside this form will be participating in the rendering. Okay, so, how many UI component we have? This one, this one, this one, this one. Every UI component in the form will be, in fact, rendered. Okay, so that's actually at form. The built-in value of render attribute. Okay, so let's actually modify the code. This time, what we want to do is we are going to render another one called the out2. Okay, and so this is the case that we are just adding another component. Okay, so then we have defined another output text out2. Okay. And then we have another one called the out3. But these two are actually included in the form. So when this button is invoked, all these three UI components will be participating in the rendering. However, the one outside of this form, this one will not be participating in the rendering when this button is invoked. Now, when this button is invoked, the only UI component that will be participating is out1 and out2, just two. This one and the out1. Okay. and this one, we'll have a 3 UI component. So here, out 1 and out 2 and out 3 and other components as well. But what gets actually rendered will be just output text values. All right, so let's see. Let's make a change of this. Okay, echo 2. And we are going to add out 2. So basically, we are building 2 UI components as a list of to be rendered UI components. And then we are going to add another output text UI component inside the form. So these 2 are participating when this button is actually being invoked. Okay, so that is after this. Okay. And then we are going to add another one outside of the form. So this particular output should never be participating in the rendering. Okay. So that's just outside of the form like this. Okay. And all right, so that's the only thing you have to do. So we have to just save the change. And now let's see whether we can refresh the page. Okay. All right, so now, we got all this. So let's actually try to, let me actually show you the sequence of things that we want to try. So when we do, so when we do echo, so let's change this one. When you do echo, the only thing that gets changed is out 1 and out 2. Okay? Now, when the reset is done, okay, when the reset is done, you can see out 1 and out 2 and out 3 are participating, but the last one is not participating because that's outside of the form. So this is the command button of reset. Okay, yeah. So this is the reset. Okay, right. And this one, yeah. So this reload doesn't do anything, because it's not actually specified. It doesn't specify anything on the yeah. Oh, okay. That's a reload of the yeah. So it's reinitializing the reload the page. It's basically reloading the page. Okay. So the key point is that this reset button is going to have partially render only the UI components that are in the list of partially rendered list, which is this, and this. Okay. And this echo is only rendering this 2. Okay, because that's what we specify this. Okay, all right. So hopefully you get the sense of how that works. I'm going to just move forward, and yeah. So this is the Ajax tag listener. So you can specify. So this is the list of UI components that will be rendered, and then you can also actually update. Okay. So let's just run this one, Ajax tag listener. Okay. So here, whenever I type something, all these things, 3 UI components are actually being changed. Okay. JPassion. So you can see the string length and event count and echo test. Okay. So, if you take a look at the code here, there are in fact 3 UI components that are being rendered. And this text field is in fact participating in the partial execution. Okay. So let's take a look at the code. So you can see this is the 3 UI components that are participating in the partial rendering. Okay. And this input text, because we have Ajax tag inside of it, this is the one that gets participating in the partial execution. Okay. And then we have a listener attribute. Okay. So it's relatively straightforward code. And here we can add another UI component called the multiply. Okay, so let's try that. So here, listener XHTML file. So we are basically adding another UI component in the partial rendering. Okay. So here we are gonna just add multiply, which is the set as an ID of this output text. Okay. So here I'm gonna just call it XYZ. Okay. And then we are going to have this one, and we'll change the output text value as XYZ. Then count here, and this one has to be XYZ. Okay. So now if I run this code, then we are basically having another UI component that is participating in the rendering. Okay. Looks like I have to change the bean as well. Okay. Okay. So we just changed it, and then we have to add this multiply property to listen bean the Java file. Okay. And we're going to add this multiply property, event count. And then we are also changing the logic of this update. Okay, so that multiply property is set. Then we have a getter and setter method of multiply. Okay, so now let's run it. Okay, so now we have let's see, JPassion. Let's see, event count. Yeah, so this is the multiply that is actually being executed. Okay, so we've just added another the UI component that is being participating in the partial rendering. Okay. My apologies, I'm just keep losing that. It's on that file. All right, so that is we cover text listener. Now let's take a look at the last exercise, which is the guest number sample application. So in this case, this is the sample application you probably have seen many times in JSF package. Okay, so when you submit the value, it will tell you whether that's a valid number or not. So let's just run that application. So here, is submit. But if you take a look at the traffic, network traffic, you can see it's being requested as an Ajax. Oh, it's 0 to 4. So I have text. Yeah, so this is actually, the validation error. So if I say 3, again, it's actually sending the request. Request header is again including faces request, okay, indicating this is Ajax request, and response is also sending back the partial response. Okay, if you take a look at the code, again, pretty straightforward. Here we are using Ajax tag, okay, and this is the execute UI component. We have only one UI component, in this case input text, and the rendered the list of UI component is 2, result, and error is 1. Okay, and on event is basically is actually JavaScript function. So you have a JavaScript function that is just kind of the resetting the result area. Okay, so here if you are modifying the code, like you are adding another UI component for execution, and we have another. So in this case we have output text field, and it's just kind of displaying the value. And in this case, whenever you do, I mean, it's basically participating in the execution as well as Yeah, so it's basically participating in the execution, and it's just kind of displaying this value. Okay. All right, so that is the end of today's presentation. So let me make sure that recording